Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2 Super Mini Mail Call. Let's get right to it. We have a package here from Ian in Brighton, England. Hi to all my viewers in England. I have been to Brighton before. Oh, it's a little note here stuck on the inside of the bag. Looks like we have a t-shirt here. It says Sagan Industries. We hope you enjoy your Sid Wizards t-shirt. Thanks for the amazing videos. SaganIndustries.com. Let's get a little closer up there. There you go. You can see it. And yeah, sorry, I was doing some painting outside, which is why I have paint on my hands. Oh, we have a larger note as well. Same thing though. Cool. So let's take a look at this. Be careful not to cut through the shirt. So it's a little blown out. Sorry about that. This t-shirt, Hubbard and Daglish and Gray and Galway and Tell and Fallen and Hulsbeck and Whitaker. Here's a look at Sagan Industries website. Seems like there's a whole bunch of different t-shirts on here. Some of them are pretty freaking cool as well. Listen to my turbo tee. We got one that's the Soundburger here. If you know the Soundburger, it's a little record player that Techmoan definitely has demonstrated a bunch of times. So the shirt's called Sid Wizards. Now it's not after the designer of the Sid, which I think was Bob Yanis. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Designer at MOS came up with the whole idea of the Sid. Left MOS to go create the company Ensoniq, which ended up being used in a whole bunch of synthesizers, I think Ensoniq branded synthesizers, and of course it was a sound chip in the Apple II GS as well. No, from my understanding, the people on this shirt are wizards at programming the SID chip, basically making it make incredible music far beyond what Bob probably ever envisioned that chip was possible of doing. These folks were able to push that chip to the absolute limit. I'm pretty sure most of the folks on this shirt are from the UK. So me being a North American computer user, and even back in the 80s, I wasn't a Commodore user. Well, I was a VIC-20 user, but I really only got into 64 more recently. I'm not super familiar with the names of all these people, but I did a couple quick Googles for some of the names on here. And yeah, if you just do a Google search for the name plus C64, you'll find all the music and stuff in the games that the folks here wrote the music for and demos and stuff like that. So that's really awesome. I'll wear that shirt with pride and people are going to say like, who are those names? And I'll have to say, they're amazing musicians who programmed for the SID chip on the 64 back in the 80s. So thank you very much, Sagan Industries, for sending me the t-shirt. I'm sure you'll see me wearing it on the channel at some point in the future. All right, next up, we have a little package here. There's a sticker on the side that says 8bitstuff.com. Wonder what this is. The name on here says Javier, and it's from Miami, Florida. So hi to all my Florida viewers. It's just very recently that Hurricane Milton just came through Florida and caused a ton of damage in Central Florida. Luckily, Javier down in Miami, I'm sure it was totally fine. I'm sure it was just rain and wind and stuff down there. My heart really goes out to everyone in Florida who was impacted by Milton. There was a lot of damage there. And of course, Hurricane Helene had just happened so soon right before that and totally destroyed North Carolina and put so much damage through all the states, including Florida, all the way up to North Carolina. So again, my heart goes out to everyone with that disaster as well. And I hope if you suffer damage to your property or your possessions that you're safe and you're going to be able to get back on your feet, hopefully soon enough. I think I have all the tape sliced properly on this box, so we can open this up. Looks like we got a note, some stickers, and some other goodies here. Oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff packed into here. And it looks like a t-shirt at the bottom as well. In case you're wondering, I didn't just say it for the last one. If you're wondering about my t-shirt size, it is men's large. I used to be able to fit into a medium, but I gotta say, as I get older, I sort of expanded a little bit, so I don't quite fit into those mediums anymore. Right, so this t-shirt is a large. Let me hold it up to the camera. It's like a pixelated motherboard, but what system is it? I'm almost thinking it's like the Commander X16, but no, it can't possibly be, right? That's awesome. Well, let's go to the note here so I can try to make heads or tails of what we're looking at. Right, so greetings, Adrian. I'm Javier, also known as Hav Master Online. We met at the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest. I'm a fellow retro enthusiast and tinkerer. And yeah, 8-bit teas, 8-bit stuff, and I guess there's a little picture of Javier. Awesome. I'm sending you a few gifts from my store, 8bitstuff.com, a new section of my authentic geekware shop, 8bittees.com. Hope you enjoy them. Here's what's included. 3D printed optical mouse for the Apple II. Yes, I remember chatting about this, Javier. That's awesome. a modern recreation that replaces the original M100 mouse. I know you told me about this, but I'm wondering, is it just the guts from the inside of the M100 mouse, or is it the entire mouse? I'm thinking it was the entire mouse from my recollection. Back to the letter here though, 3D printed floppy emu kit designed to house your big mess of wire floppy emu using an original disc to metal case. I have a floppy emu, of course. I just did a little case that I got when I bought the thing. And I've seen people who take the original case and this goes on Hackaday or something, and they mounted the big mess of wires floppy emu inside the original Apple disk drive. And it all looked pretty cool. So I guess there's now a version that you can get directly instead of having to like print your own or whatever, right from Javier's shop here. How cool is that? And we got a USB-C adapter with voltmeter display, a compact replacement for the 2C power brick. Just pair it with a 15-volt power supply. Super sweet. And the t-shirt, which we already looked at, a pixelated motherboard design. Okay, so it's not like any specific motherboard. I hope these gifts bring you some fun and utility to your retro setup. If you'd like to learn more about these and how easy it is to use any of them, feel free to check out my channel and visit 8-Bit Stuff. Thanks again for your incredible channel, and I'm sending you a big hug. Best, Javier. Thank you, Javier. There's Javier's socials and stuff like that. All right, so let's see what we have here. Okay, so stickers. So there's Javier there. We got 8-Bit tees, t-shirts, and 8-Bit Stuff. That is freaking awesome. So the first item here, this has got to be, oh, it's the entire replacement for the front panel. And it looks way different than what I thought it looked like. Ooh, okay, so it's an entire new screen. And I guess you connect that up right to the floppy emu to replace its OLED. And then this little thing here, I'd have to go look up how that works exactly. Oh, this is an SD card extension. Now I get it. Oh, right, for the micro SD, we got the LED there. These would be the buttons here. And I think the way the floppy emu probably mounts into this structure here is there are 3 buttons on the floppy emu, and those will then push through the front here. When it's not installed, they won't push through exactly, but once I just sort of hold them on the back, they will. That is really, really nifty. I have to say, very creative design here. I really like it. And obviously this is 3D printed, but it seems like a really good quality piece. And I actually really like the texture here. You can just see that it's 3D printed on that ridge there, but when it comes to this texture here, it's obviously the print bed or whatever, and it really matches the plastic that's on the front of the drive. Now my floppy emu, I don't think I'm gonna be mounting it in here. And the reason why is I end up using that thing a lot on lots of different computers, Macs and stuff like that. And the Apple floppy drive is quite big. This is the size of the floppy emu right now, and I just sort of keep it like this with the cable wrapped up around it. And obviously putting it inside a floppy drive is gonna make it really quite big and a little bit bulky and unwieldy. And if I'm using this on a Mac or whatever, I just plug it in the back and it just sits on my desk. And for people who specifically use the floppy emu with their Apple II all the time and generally don't move it around like I do all the time, this is a really awesome idea. So if you have a floppy emu and you have an Apple IIe and you have one of those extra disk drives, it doesn't permanently alter the disk drive, right? You're just taking out the actual original disk drive, and that beige case that's around it is still, you know, what you're using. You just mount this inside of it. And then the ribbon cable here just comes out the back of the drive where the original ribbon does. So if you ever want to go back to the original Apple II disk drive, you can. There's not like any permanent damage to putting this in there. And then it just looks a little bit more correct on your desk, you know, instead of this clear plastic case. All right, so let's look at the next thing here. What is this little thing here? Oh, right. This is the 2C adapter. Oh, that is freaking cool. I love it. I absolutely love it. So for my Apple IIcs, what I ended up doing a while back is I just made my own little pigtail here. So this plugs into the 2C right there, and then this is a normal 2.1 millimeter barrel input, and see it says Apple IIc on there. And then I just use something like this, 12 volts, 4 amp. This is completely fine to run an Apple IIc. It's actually a little mini switch mode power supply in there, so you don't even have to give it 15 volts, you can give it 12 volts, and it works perfectly fine. And what I did is after I made this, so I could use it on USB Type-C, because I actually did want to do that, is I just went and bought some of these really inexpensive cables here. So this is USB-C power delivery, and I have 12 volts written on there, and it just goes to a normal 2.1 millimeter barrel jack. So you just plug this in together here, and there we go. Now I have a USB Type-C Apple IIc, and this is like a battery pack, for instance, would power it up without any issue. So a battery pack like this, which is what I use to charge my camera usually, so hopefully this has a charge. Yes, it does. So if I plug this in here, this just negotiates the 12 volts, and we have what works with an Apple IIc. But this adapter here from Javier, and boy, this looks all so blown out. Let me like move this thing off the bench here so we get back to the blue. It's a little less blown out looking. Okay, so yeah, this adapter that Javier made not only shows you the voltage, so we'll just plug this cable in here. This is a USB-C to C cable, and plug it into my power bank here. And now it says 5 volts, which is weird. And I think what happens with these 3-digit displays is the decimal point moves if it's 15. This is without a doubt power delivery power supply here. And you can see here this supports up to 20 volts, and I use this thing all the time, the PD output. And of course we're using the PD output, so the 5 volts is a little unusual. I'm gonna plug this into another power supply I have up here on this power supply is normally what I use with the Pine Sill. And same thing, 5 volts. All right, Javier, that's a little unusual, but I might as well grab an Apple IIc and we'll just give it a try. All right, so here's my little 2C here, the one I use for testing most of the time. One thing you have to keep in mind is the power connector on the 2C is kind of stiff, so you really got to give it a good old push. I'm going to take this cable and we're going to plug it back into this power bank here. And I'll plug this in there and we'll see what happens. No. Yeah, I'm getting no signs of life here on the 2C when we turn this on. Obviously, if we're only getting 5 volts in here, that is definitely not enough. Oh, you know what? I think the problem is here, Javier, is that my cable doesn't go all the way in. It's not making a firm connection. By the way, you can see Apple IIc, and you can see the Apple logo there. I think it's not in all the way. That's the issue. Let's see about this cable here. I know this isn't gonna work because this is not meant to go into something like this. Yeah, that is definitely not making a good connection in there. So I have another cable here. Yeah, I think that's the same problem. That's not really clicking in there correctly. So just to show everyone that USB Type-C is perfectly acceptable for powering a 2C, I'm just going to plug in my little 12-volt cable here, and we'll plug this into my power bank, just like we were doing before. And there we go, the lights came on there, and we turn this on. There we go. We have a working Apple IIc. And that is with 12 volts. Obviously with 15 volts, it would work as well. And in case you're wondering how these cables work, not the adapter I made, but this cable here, there's actually a little chip inside this right here on this end, and that does the PD negotiation. So as soon as you connect it up to this, it will start negotiating with the power bank, and if it can supply the 12 volts or the 15 volts, depending on which cable you have. And I have 20 volt versions of these and 15 volts. They were pretty inexpensive, so I bought a whole bunch of these. Once I found a seller, I think at AliExpress maybe, that sold these that were, you know, using good thick wire, because if the wire is too thin, then obviously you're not going to be able to carry the current that they claimed. But this actually uses pretty thick cable, and I've done some tests on these cables, and they do seem to be able to deliver, you know, at least like 20, 30 watts without any issue over these cables. Anyways, you plug this into your power bank or your power supply, it does the PD negotiation, you get the voltage you requested. And if the negotiation doesn't happen, like when you first plug in the cable and it wasn't clicked in all the way, then you end up with just 5 volts, and that's enough to power the little chip that's in the connector here to get it communicating with what's in here, and then that's when it ramps right up to that 15 volts or 12 or whatever that the chip is configured to give. So I totally love the whole idea of this. I think, unfortunately, a little bit of a modification to the 3D printed case, because this looks like a, yeah, it looks like a 3D printed case, I think. I don't think this is molded. Would be in order to allow this to click in and plug in properly all the way. Yeah, it's almost there. It's just not quite there. I guess what I can do is I'll just Dremel away some of this, and then we'll see if I can make it work. Okay, well, that didn't go to plan. It was very difficult. I was trying to Dremel this away, and unfortunately I made it a little bit bigger, but I think I damaged the USB-C port in the process. Can't quite tell how this is actually put together from a construction standpoint. I don't see any seams on this. And as you can see, it's a little mangled there. So sorry about that, Javier. I kind of damaged this, but with the 3 cables I tried, it wasn't making a good connection anyways. What made it really hard to do the Dremel is that this is PLA or some kind of 3D printed material, and it just starts to melt. Unlike normal plastic where, yeah, it melts, but it kind of easily carves away. This just kind of melted right onto the tip of my little tool here. So yeah, sorry about that, I kind of seemingly ruined this. The cable still clicks in. All right, well, not all is lost because Javier also sent along the mouse replacement. And this is really the most exciting thing I think there is. Wow, even the cable's kind of realistic looking. And when we look at it on top of the 2C there, which it is compatible, it should be compatible with the 2C, this looks really quite good. I mean, yeah, I know it's a replica, so it's not, you know, it's not 100%. It looks like it's 3D printed, but I'm pretty shocked at how this looks. You know, there's a little bit of a, you know, it's not perfect down here on the bottom, but that's on the bottom of the mouse anyways. On the top part of the mouse, the part you're feeling actually feels really good and authentic. And for comparison's sake, here is a real Apple mouse here. And you can see there's a little bit of an obvious difference, but this is injection molding. And from a normal sitting distance, I can hardly tell, other than the color, I guess, being a little different, I can hardly tell that this one is a replica. And look at the strain relief. This whole thing looks absolutely great. And compared to the side there, yep. And on the bottom here, I wrote no Apple II because this one, for whatever reason, doesn't work on Apple IIs, and not all of these M100s do. And you need this little adapter here that allows you to use the Macintosh mouse on the Apple IIc, for instance, or a 2E. Take a look at the cable on the replica mouse versus the real thing. Also very good, very close. And the thing is, these mice are now becoming really expensive. If you get yourself a Mac or an Apple II and you want to use a mouse with it, you got to fork out a whole bunch of money to get one of these. And it's a, you know, ball mouse, which means it's annoying and it may not work on the Apple II without the adapter because you can't really tell. They all have the same model number on the bottom. Some work, some don't. It's all a pain. Well, obviously, this mouse here that Javier makes, you're doing away with the junky ball. It's pretty light. Feels really good on the desk here. Let's give it a try. So for powering the 2C, which we're going to do testing with, I will use my kind of hacked together cable here. So we'll pop that in. And I'll be connecting this up to the RGB to HDMI using the 15-pin connector there and a little cable that I made. And we just select the Apple IIc TTL profile in here. And let's see when we turn this on. There we go, looks good. And color, yep, working as well. So for testing, we're going to use a copy of Desoldering, which is mouse software for the Apple II line of computers. And there we go, we have the, it's glowing there, so that's working. Oh, got the phase wrong. What you have to do is we're going to have to change the phase here. I think maybe 270 is the right one for the Apple II. Yep, there we go. Oh, wow, it works. And you know what? I can tell right away, it has a higher DPI than the regular Apple mouse. So that means on the Apple II, the speed of the mouse pointer is a lot faster. It's almost so fast that I'm not used to it, which is kind of amusing, right? As you can see, it absolutely freaking works. That is super cool. So obviously this will work on the Mac Plus, Mac 128, Mac 512, the Apple IIe with the mouse card, and then the Apple IIc. Those are the machines specifically that support this particular mouse. My only feedback, and this has nothing really to do with this mouse, because the Apple mouse is just like this, is it doesn't really have any like Teflon pads on the bottom. If you just look at any other mouse, see there's those little pads there. These just allow it to slide more easily. And I remember back in the day on the Apple mice, there was a little add-on you would get that would give you these really thin Teflon pads to stick here, and then also around these two bumps right here, and that would just allow it to slide a lot more smoothly and a little bit more easily. And the only thing that's weird is just how fast the mouse pointer moves compared to the normal Apple II. In fact, let's switch over to the other mouse here, the actual Apple one with this adapter on here. And now using the actual ball mouse, I mean, you can just see how slow that is. It's, I mean, I don't think the Apple II really has any acceleration. So the concept that we're used to on modern computers is that whole mouse acceleration. This doesn't really have it. And I don't know, printer setup, is there even a setting in here for, I don't think you can even adjust the mouse speed on here. At least I don't think you can, but it is so slow that it's almost kind of frustrating how slow it is. So obviously the new Replica mouse having an optical sensor, it's so much faster that I think the Apple II actually struggles to count the movement ticks properly. And you can see that it's actually a bit laggy, and I don't blame the mouse. I think that's just the Apple II mouse circuitry. Yeah, see, after I move it, it's still kind of moving a little bit. So, yeah, a little bit of a learning curve if you're used to the way the Apple II mouse is and you get one of these. But if you don't have an Apple mouse, you don't have one of these expensive things here, get one of these, and then there you go, problem solved. Let's take a quick look at Javier's website. So there's an Amiga mouse replica as well? Yes, coming soon. All right, well, that's great, because Amiga mice, I mean, we're talking outrageous amount of money. And then we have replicas of the original Apple joysticks as well. A replica Lisa mouse. And then we have replicas for the Apple II and vintage Macintosh. And these are obviously what we're looking at now. What's the difference here? Serial connection? Confused. USB? I guess you could plug it into an emulator, and that's where the USB version is. But how does this serial one work exactly? Obviously, it's been rewired on the inside to actually work. And it says down here that this has been tested on all the various Apple machines, 2C+, et cetera, the stuff I mentioned. And it's a handmade product. But of course, being optical, you'll never have a ball to kind of screw up. And yeah, that's freaking awesome. Here's the power adapter that I obviously messed up by trying to make it work. And there it is, 15.2 volts, it works. And the notes here, in case there was anything that I missed, it just says it needs to have power delivery at 15 volts, like a Apple laptop power supply, something like that. I don't immediately see anything about the whole cable depth problem. And considering I tried all 3 cables and none really fit in there properly, I'm having to think that maybe there was just a slight misalignment or something of the circuit board that's in there. Maybe the USB-C jack was pushed back a little bit more than it should be, and that's why I couldn't get it all the way in. So Javier will, I'm sure, see this video and then be able to comment on that particular problem. And then for the floppy EMU, well, first of all, it's got a really big OLED screen. It looks really awesome. Okay, so there's a couple different versions. There's this one, which looks like the Apple 3.5-inch drive, like the one for the 2GS, and that is super cool. It looks really quite authentic there. And then here's the one for the original Apple 5.25-inch disk drive, and it looks like we have a few different options, including the fully assembled one that I got here, and you can actually get one that's the entire disk drive if you don't want to make one for yourself. That's cool. So that is really freaking cool. Thanks very much, Javier, for sending this stuff in. The replica mouse, I'm very impressed with. I usually keep this one around, with this adapter on it, whether I need to use it on an Apple II or have a Mac Plus or something on the bench. But I love the idea of this replica, especially because the real deal mice are so expensive. And thank you very much for this awesome kit here. I may end up putting my floppy EMU in here. I may. I just have to think about that a little bit. Like I said, the size thing is a bit of a problem for me because I use that floppy EMU so much on so many different computers. It's never just sitting there, hooked up to one computer all the time. So that's where I think that this kit would be absolutely perfect. If, like I said, if you have a floppy EMU that you always use on one machine, yeah, put it in this, and that way it looks awesome on the desk, and this is a lot easier to use with the front buttons and the really big screen and all that stuff. That's just awesome. Thanks very much for the t-shirt, and then thank you very much for this USB PD power adapter. I'm really sorry that I did end up ruining this, although I couldn't get it working anyway, so I guess that's my bad. And I'm very curious if you've encountered the same problem that I was having with this, where it just didn't click in all the way, so we never actually got the high voltage. We just got stuck with the 5 volts, the default power on PD. So anyways, thanks again, Javier. It was really nice to meet you, and thanks again for sending this stuff in. All right, next up, we have a package here that comes from Tech2 for sale. I just realized this does not say mail call on it, so this may be something that I ordered for myself. I did this in the last mail call episode as well. I kind of pick stuff up from my P.O. box, and then I just go, oh, it's got to be a mail call item, and I just put it in the pile with the other stuff, and I never actually look at the label properly, and maybe I should do that. I guess what happens is I don't remember that I've ordered stuff sometimes, and that's part of the problem. Okay, that's it for the box. Now this said fragile handle with care on it. So what could this be, I wonder? It is something I ordered myself. I totally forgot. Okay, so what this is an Extron 300A, and this is the capture device that I use for VGA and RGB input on the bench here. This thing is very versatile, has an external power supply, VGA input, does have audio input, which I guess mixes with the HDMI, but I don't use that part of it. HDMI out, and RS-232 serial control. And the reason why I use this as a scan converter and not my, what was it called? The open source scan converter, which is what I used to use. I don't like that thing that much. I mean, it's bad, but for me, it's not great because the problem with that is anytime the video input changes, it causes the HDMI output to resynchronize. That's really not helpful for me when I'm doing my video captures in production, because anytime I turn on a computer or reboot a computer, you'd get like several seconds where it would just say Elgato, which is my capture device, and I couldn't see what was happening. With this box, on the other hand, it's always outputting the exact same resolution, which I forgot what I have it set to, like 1280 by 1024 over HDMI. And it doesn't matter what the input is. The input could be any resolution, it could be changing, you know, a game could switch it, you could run, you know, reboot the computer, whatever. It's always there. And that means that I don't lose what's happening when you first turn on the computer, like the BIOS boot screen and stuff, you see it. So I ended up ordering another one of these only because if that one ever broke, and these become hard to find, then I'd kind of be up a creek, at least for now, as this is such a great capture solution. So this is just basically my spare unit, and I'm realizing now that it didn't come with the power supply. So that's a really good point. If you're ordering one of these and you want to try it, you gotta order it with the power supply. And it uses this weird little 2-pin connector here that you could probably open the box and solder some wires onto and just, you know, add a new power connector. It's just 12 volts, so it's nothing particularly weird. They just used a weird power connector, like a locking thing. I rely on the tools that I use for making these videos, the cameras, the computers, but especially the capture hardware that I have here, the RGB to HDMI, which we were just using, the Extron for when I'm using PC stuff, and even the RetroTank 5X, which I have a lot of problems with it, but it still is what I use for composite and S-video capture. So I really need to have spare capture devices because stuff breaks occasionally, and if this thing broke and I couldn't find one, I'd really be out of luck. So this spare was pretty inexpensive. I don't remember how much it was. It was like 20 bucks or something like that. So I'm like, I'm grabbing it. And it came, and I obviously completely forgot that I ordered it, and that's why it was sitting in the pile back there. So because I'm not even going to test that thing, because I've shown the Extron in operation a million times on the channel, I'm going to grab something else. So here's the replacement item. And this comes from Reinhard in Austria. Hi to all my Austrian viewers. So let's see what we have here. Oh, okay, we got some test leads of some kind. And there's no note in here. So I guess I'm gonna have to go read up on what this is exactly, because just looking at this doesn't ring any bells. But let's see. Oh, right. Oh gosh, I've had this forever. Oh yeah, this was sent in back in July. Oh man. Right, okay, so these are Lumacode devices. Well, there it is, VIC-20 digitizer revision 1. You know what, I was supposed to have looked at these months ago. Okay, so what we're looking at here is this is a Lumacode device. It sits under the VIC-1 chip in the VIC-20, and it takes the signal that's going into the chip and does magic with it, and then it outputs it through this 2-pin signal here, this cable, and you send that to an RGB to HDMI, and you get a full color, perfect, pixel perfect image on your RGB to HDMI. These two here are for the VIC-2, so Commodore 64, and it looks like we have an old version here. Oh, sorry, that's out of focus there. Looks like we have a version for the R56A, which is the very old NTSC VIC-2 chips that really no one likes to use because they're frankly terrible. And then this one here, I guess, auto detects between PAL and NTSC. And these are just amazing ways to get pixel perfect images directly from your systems. And this version for the VIC-20 is something I think I should have looked at a long time ago to make sure it worked with NTSC VIC-20s. I want to quickly talk about what Lumacode actually is. It's basically an interface for transferring digital video from retro computers into something like the RGB to HDMI. And this is the big takeaway. Its main application is used for machines that generally do not expose the video signal in a digitally usable form. The Commodore 8-bit line of computers and the Atari 8-bit line of computers are perfect examples of machines that don't do that. The signals that go into the graphics chip on these computers is digitized using a little interposer board like the ones I've just shown, and they have a small FPGA on them that convert that signal into this Lumacode signal, which is then sent to your external upscaler. And the whole idea is that that little interposer board can be relatively inexpensive. Now, this actual Lumacode video signal is very similar to a standard composite video signal, and it uses 75 ohm termination exactly like a normal composite video that comes out of these old computers. Unlike NTSC and PAL color video though, Lumacode is actually transferring the color information using digital data encoded with 4 different voltage levels. The bits of multiple sample points can be joined, high bits first, to form a longer digital number than represents the color of a single pixel. For the Commodore 64, since it has 16 colors, that's encoded with 2 samples. Now, looking at the Atari 8-bit line of computer, and there's the interposer installed, the Atari 8-bit line of machine, while it can only show 16 colors at a time, it actually has a palette of up to 256 colors. And that means there's some trickery that needs to go on here. So 16 hues of each can be shown with 16 luminosities. This would require a total of 8 bits of information needed for every pixel, but because of the way the colors are generated by the Atari internally, every 2 consecutive pixels share the same hue. So only a total of 12 bits is needed for every pair of pixels. So these 12 bits of data will be encoded with a Lumacode signal with 6 samples, each transferring 2 bits. Grouping 2 samples together with the high bits first to form a 4-bit number, 3 such numbers encode the data for the pixel pair in the following order: hue, luminance 1, and luminance 2. And when you look at the actual graphics on the Atari, when you're running in the higher color modes, you can see that the pixels are actually relatively wide. So that allows those multiple samples to be encoded inside that one pixel to properly describe the colors. But when you look at the Commodore 64, this graphics mode on Arkanoid here, it's using the larger pixels, but you can have 320 by 200 pixels on the 64, and therefore you really don't have as much room as these large pixels to encode the data. But since we only need to encode 4 bits of data for the 16 colors that are fixed on the 64, if you're running in the 320 pixel mode, well, really, if you just have the Lumacode output at 640, then you're going to be able to have those 2 luminance levels in each pixel to allow for the 16 colors to be described. And take a look at this screen here. These are the 16 colors on the 64, and this is the Lumacode video, but connected to a normal composite monitor. And you can see these vertical bars here, very similar to artifact color from the Apple II. And the RGB to HDMI is able to digitize this signal here and convert this back into the 16 colors that the 64 uses, and you get a pixel perfect representation. And this chart here shows all the 64 colors and what subpixels you need, the luminance levels of the subpixels in each 64 pixels that get digitized and turned into the full color image. And so clever how the Lumacode signal is able to take just these 4 luminance levels and convert that into, say, 256 colors on the Atari 8-bit, or even the latest version of the digitizer, which is for the NES. Unfortunately, only the PAL versions right now. And the NES also has a somewhat large color palette, so this is able to do that similar Atari-style encoding, I guess, to facilitate all the NES colors. And indeed, it says it has 3 samples per pixel for the NES. 4 levels of Luma gives us 64 possible combinations that represent an index in the NES palette. So it doesn't even have as clever of a system as on the Atari, since the NES only has 64 colors. So I think what I need to do is go get my box of RGB HDMIs and grab the one that has a composite input on it, because the hat that goes on the RGB HDMI needs to be the version that takes a composite input, and that's what Lumacode is. And then we can use this VIC-20 board right here. This is my test board, which was sent in graciously by a viewer. It is 100% socketed. It's signed here by the viewer, and well, your signature is one like mine that is so hard to read. And this right here is the VIC chip, the 6560, I think that's what that is. So we'll get the correct one here for the VIC-20 digitizer. So this was in there like that. You know what I need to do is I need to grab a marker. I like to draw on these sockets here, just so I know which way the notch is. So I basically draw a notch onto the socket like that. It just helps me remember the orientation. So yeah, the chip goes that way, and then for the digitizer here, this has a notch on it. So we're gonna stick that into here, like so. Put the lever down. I'm gonna use this to straighten the pins on the VIC-2 chip, or the VIC-1 chip. I'm gonna make that mistake a bunch of times in this video, so I do apologize. And we're gonna slide that into there, just like so. And what we need to facilitate that is, oh, there's this. I hadn't seen this in forever. This is the RetroTink 2X. This is one of the early ones. And I hadn't been able to find this for the longest time, and it was just in this box the whole time. Anyhow, okay, so these are all the various ones I have. This one is for the 2GS. And then this one right here is the one with the composite input. So this will be able to do the Lumacode. So I got these little test leads and stuff that came with this. So what we can do is we can just use this little RCA jack here. Polarity wise, I'm not sure how this connects up, but I'm gonna connect this pin, which is the center pin, to there. And I'm just gonna use this relatively chunky thick shielded cable here to connect these up to each other. And for this one here, it looks like I left an SD card in here. I'm going to switch to this SD card, which is my most up-to-date SD card. All right, so we have booted up here. Let's see, I've never used Lumacode, so this will be a first for me. So we'll go to Commodore, we'll do VIC-20 Lumacode unterm. I don't know what that means, but let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Now, where I completely kind of screwed up here is that I should have tested this months and months ago, because the question was, does this work on the NTSC VIC-20s? And it's not 100% clear yet. And in fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to connect up the normal composite video output, and let's see if that's working with the c0pperdragon here under the VIC-1 chip. So there we go. Okay, good. Hopefully the c0pperdragon board is working properly underneath there. And there we go, that's composite VIC-20. It's not terrible, it's fine, but yeah, there we go. And now I switch back to the input that has the RGB HDMI, and let's turn this on. I don't know if I have this hooked up correctly. We're using VIC-20 LC, there's a 50 and 60 hertz profile. Well, the problem might be the polarity on here, but the other problem could be that I just don't have the connection on the RGB to HDMI correct, like wherever the RCA jack connects up. Maybe that's the problem. So let's turn this off and on. Oh, I saw like a little bit of something there. I suppose what I should probably do is put the VIC-2 one inside my Commodore 64 so we can just validate that the RGB to HDMI is working. Okay, so let's see. Here's the ZIF64, and I have the Quarry in here. I'll take that out. We'll switch back to a normal VIC-2 chip here. Let me just grab one off to the side here. All right, yep, it's my one with the MSI heatsink on it. I think I took that off a motherboard or something. What I want to do here is I just want to double check that we have a working system. It's always good to do that first, so we'll go over to composite, and we'll power this on. There we go, we're working. That's RetroTink silliness with the blown out colors. Ignore that. So I'm going to take the auto detect c0pperdragon here. And of course we'll have the notch the correct way, which is this way. So I have the RCA cable connected up, and then we got to reinstall the VIC. So the VIC is absolutely necessary because all the c0pperdragon does is snoop the signals that are going between the VIC and the computer, like the CPU and everything. I think what we'll do first is we'll just make sure that the VIC-2 is still working through composite video here. Yep, we're looking good. And I have it set for 64 Lumacode here. And okay. So we're seeing video. Let's change this to 60 hertz. Well, it's better than we were getting with the VIC-20, isn't it? Let's switch the polarity around here. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that way it's doing nothing. So it really only works this way. Now there's a bunch of settings in here, and I don't know if I have to change any of these to make this work. I don't know. You know, I'm not really familiar with how this whole thing works, and that's part of the issue here. This is not a problem with the Lumacode. It's just understanding how the RGB HDMI with the correct hats, you have to have the settings right, and there's different versions, and the RGB HDMI that I normally use, which is this one right here, this is for digital TTL RGB. This doesn't have any kind of like analog input. This one, though, does have an analog input, and I still don't get why this isn't working. What I can see, though, is that the color is being decoded perfectly, but the sync is obviously not working. But we obviously are dealing with a sync problem, where it is not syncing correctly. Again, I don't think this is a Lumacode issue. Oh, right. That's interesting. So I go from this to that, and now it looks correct, but the offsets are all wrong, which just seems weird to me. I figured this would have all been configured perfectly already, but I guess not. Okay, that's interesting. And of course it's flashing now, and the RGB to HDMI does this when it doesn't like the sync that's coming in. And when you put the menu up, it will stop the flashing. Well, I don't know, I've been fiddling around for a while now, and I can make it show a stable image here, but it will immediately have an issue again as soon as I reboot the RGB to HDMI. just doing that, like I was trying to adjust the horizontal offset, immediately made it crash. I have to reset the RGB to HDMI. I did some Googling to try to figure out what exactly is going on, and I couldn't find anything to actually give me any info on what's going on here. By the way, that problem is just my machine here. It's not actual problem. So the only thing I can think of is that there's some issue with my analog board on my RGB to HDMI that's causing this particular problem. I haven't used it in a long time, and the only thing I ever really tested it with wasn't Lumacode. I plugged it into Apple IIs and the TRS-80 Model 1 over composite, and it totally worked fine. I was able to get a perfectly good image. All right, so I've been fiddling around for like an hour, and I couldn't get any of this stuff working. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the c0pperdragon, because I know plenty of people who use them, and they work really, really well for them. So there's clearly something I'm doing wrong, or the RGB to HDMI is not working, or there's some other issue happening here. At least I got a stable image on the 64, but this is kind of one of the problems sometimes of me working on stuff that I get in mail call, is it takes much more time than I have available for making these videos to figure out all the details of how to make it work. I did go watch a couple videos on getting c0pperdragon interposers working, and people just put them in, plugged them into their RGB HDMI, set it to Lumacode 64, it just worked. No fiddling with any settings. So I don't understand why it was out of sync, and it was just such a mess on mine, and I had to make so many adjustments. So that's a curiosity in and of itself. But let's take a look at the c0pperdragon Tindy store here, where you can buy all these interposer boards. And here's the one for the 64, which is a reasonable $50 too, considering what this thing does. Unfortunately, out of stock right now. And it says here, this board is inserted between the VIC-2 and the socket and uses an FPGA. I guess there's a little tiny one on there that snoops on all the communication, and then it will generate this video signal, this Lumacode video signal that the RGB to HDMI should be able to decode properly. You can use an RGB to HDMI or something similar to decode that Lumacode and turn that back into a perfect color, super sharp image. It says that the 64 version will auto-detect the type of VIC-2 you have. So this is just a normal VIC-2 in here. There is that other version that I got sent that has the R56A, which is the very first VIC-2, but I'm using the one that says it's set to auto. Although I think I am. Let me just double check that I am, because that would be freaking hilarious. Yes, this one here has the little tick mark that says R56A, and the one that's in there says auto. Let's take a look at the documentation here just to see what I'm doing wrong exactly. So there's the interposer board itself, installation. You take the VIC-2 out, you put the interposer into the board, and you reinstall the VIC-2. And then for the hookup instructions on the 64, it's just telling you to plug it into the RF modulator. You obviously don't need to do it this way. You can just, really should be able to do it the way that I'm doing it. But the installation is extremely slick there. See how you don't have to cut anything. It can go right through the lid in the RF modulator, and you just plug it into the jack on the back of the machine. And looking at my RGB to HDMI, I removed the cover there. This is the digitizer board here, which this has a CPLD on it. It's a 12-bit version, issue 4. And then this part here, this little middle board, is what converts the analog signal from this multi-pin connector here into something that this can then digitize. 3-4 level. I'm pretty sure the one that's in there is one of these 3-4 level ones. And then the connections that go into this header here are YUV. And I'm on the Y, or the luminance one, with this little cable right here. That's all I have connected up. And we can see here that it's currently set to 4-level mode, and there are 4 thresholds here: low, mid, and high, and then sync. But it seems like it shouldn't just be sync, it actually needs 4 distinct thresholds. So I guess I don't quite get that, and certainly the documentation does not explain it. And the documentation that I was just looking at for the c0pperdragon stuff, that didn't say anything about what you should do, and the RGB HDMI documentation is also similarly vague. So I think for now, I need to leave this because I'm a bit frustrated by it all. I'm going to talk to a few people who know what they're doing, who can at least give me some info on maybe what I'm missing here, and then I can revisit this again, because I really would like to revisit this. Because if we go back to the Tindy store here, you'll see that there are a bunch of these digitizers for all sorts of different systems. There's one for the Commodore 128, there's obviously the one for the 64, which I've been trying to use here. There's one for the Atari 8-bit systems, that's the GTIA one here. We have one for the VIC-20 here. Now this is the one that I said may not work on the NTSC machines. Let's see if it says anything about that. Starting January 25th, it supports all versions of the VIC-20, and the box here has a date on it. This is from 2023. It's over a year I've had this and not even opened the package. Oh, I feel so terrible. I was supposed to have tested this on the VIC-20, and I didn't get around to it. Looks like someone named Todd lent c0pperdragon NTSC one to get that working. So the firmware that's on mine is obviously not going to work. But the fact is I can't even get the 6401 working, so it wouldn't have worked anyways. But anyways, back to here. There's a TIA version, so that's for the Atari 2600. There's one for the TMS, so the TI-99 and all those types of systems that use the TMS 9918. Let's take a look and see if that does support the NTSC one as well. Yeah, 9918. Freaking awesome. So you could get a pixel perfect output as well from your TI-99. Ah, it's awesome. There's one for the ULA, so that's for the ZX Spectrum. And then now, the latest thing we have is a PPU version for NESs, but right now it's PAL only. I cannot wait for a version of this that actually works on NTSC, and that's because the only solution up until now was some kind of a replacement that was the FPGA. It was very expensive and very, very hard to get. So something that's 50 bucks that could do this is freaking awesome. And then there's also this board here that plugs in the RGB HDMI that takes the input. And maybe this is what I'm missing. I don't know if this is somehow different or something. It's the next day, I'm editing the video, and I wanted to let everyone know that I got this thing working. So here's the Easy Flash cartridge, and then we have Prince of Persia running on the 64, and you can just see how pixel perfect this all really looks. Now, the main reason I got this working is I reached out to Mark over at the Retro channel and Aaron at Retro Hack Shack because I knew both of them had experience using these c0pperdragons with the RGB to HDMI, and I was asking them what they thought I might be doing wrong. And I didn't show this in the footage that you just watched of me trying to get it working, but this is the main homepage for the Lumacode on GitHub. And if you click on RGB to HDMI, it talks about plugging the interposers into the RGB to HDMI through one of these little boards here. These are the ones that c0pperdragon sell. It's the hat that goes right on top of the Raspberry Pi Zero that essentially, well, allows it to very simply take an input of the Lumacode, and then you'll get pixel perfect output. Well, I'm not using one of these boards. I'm actually using one of the analog comparator boards that is usable with all sorts of other systems, not just Lumacode stuff. And what's really frustrating is when I was trying to get this thing working, I went to this webpage and I read through this documentation here, and it just kind of says plug it in. It doesn't really say anything else. And it even says, oh, go check out the RGB to HDMI wiki for more information. Well, this is just the main page of the RGB to HDMI project. There's a lot of documentation here, and it's really difficult to navigate this stuff. And I've been using these things for years now, and even I struggle to understand this documentation. So nothing here was helping me at all with actually getting this thing working. Well, it turns out, talking to Aaron, he figured out what the problem was for me. And let's see if I can even find where this is. Let's go to overview. Okay, so this is the overview page talking about how Lumacode actually works. We looked at this earlier in the video, right? Well, if you scroll down to the bottom here, you look up this section, wiring to RGB to HDMI, it talks about the fact that if you're using the 6-pin analog input comparator board, which I am, you need to use an adapter cable that converts RCA to the 6-pin IDC. Okay, fine. I already made one of those years ago when I was first testing the comparator board out. But this is one key sentence right here. The pre-existing RCA cables may not work as the new one has the input signal connected to both pin G and the sync pins. Now, I don't know why it says G. It's actually the Y pin, as in the luminance pin, which is pin 4. But the sync pin is pin 2, and I was not connected to that. This is needed to allow the RGB HDMI to distinguish the 4 levels of Luma. In contrast, it's perfectly okay to use this new cable for other mono computers as the sync signal is ignored. This is the key section that's missing from that other documentation page. I was using the old style cable that only went to, well, what says here, the G pin, which is actually the luminance pin, and then ground, which always worked perfectly when I was using the cable with Apple IIs, TRS-80 Model 1, and other systems like that. So what I had to do is I made a new connector here, and the green wire is, of course, the video signal. The black wire is ground, so ground is on pin 1, and then I have the green wire go through on pin 2 and loop around to pin 4, and I crimped that together, and once I did that, I just plugged it back in, booted up, reset the settings on the RGB HDMI, and it just worked. It absolutely worked perfectly, and you can see here it's just working flawlessly now. So I really implore c0pperdragon, if you see this, could you please augment the section here on RGB to HDMI to put a little bit more information than what's here put that stuff about if you're using the analog board, you need to be connected to pin 2 and 4 for the video signal along with ground on pin 1. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Beyond that, a really good test is if you actually hook the composite video from the Commodore 64 directly up to the RGB to HDMI with Lumacode enabled. This is actually what you see. So the dots you're seeing here are actually the chroma details in the NTSC color of the 64 that I'm using displayed, but there are no issues with sync, and I didn't adjust any of the settings on the RGB HDMI. This is literally set to Lumacode 64, and I plugged it in. So a really good test to see if you have your cable correct is when you connect it to the composite output of the 64, you will see this while this RGB to HDMI is set to Lumacode. And if you plug it into the Luma cable, so the Luma output on the 64 that doesn't have the color dot pattern, you will see this when the RGB to HDMI is set to Lumacode. So that's what I recommend doing. If you're having trouble here, just with the out-of-the-box settings on RGB to HDMI, this is what you should be seeing when it's set to Lumacode plugged into composite or Lumacode. And then, of course, when you plug it into the proper Lumacode output from the interposer, this is what you're going to see. Pixel perfect image. So I really want to thank Aaron at Retro Hack Shack and Mark at the Retro Channel for helping me work through this particular issue. It was pretty frustrating to me, and it's really just because I was using a cable that I wired up years ago before Lumacode even existed, and therefore I didn't know about this pin 2 and 4 requirement, and it didn't say it anywhere here on the documentation page for RGB to HDMI. Anyhow, I think that's going to be it for this video. I have kind of gone off on many rails here with this video. Hopefully I can edit this together into something that makes sense. Thanks to c0pperdragon for saying this stuff. Sorry again for taking so long. I want to thank the guys over at Sagan Industries for sending in the Sid Wizards t-shirt. I really appreciate that. And then thank you, Javier at 8-Bit Stuff, for sending in your reproduction mouse and the t-shirt and the drive adapter for the floppy emu. And of course, the power supply adapter for the 2C that I kind of ruined and I could never get working. And so yeah, sorry about that, but thanks again. This mouse is freaking awesome. I love the community making awesome stuff like this. And then I guess thank you for myself to getting this Extron 300 and forgetting about it. So I guess that's going to be for this mail call episode. Again, I'm sorry for anyone who sent stuff in. It's sitting back there for over a year. It's all cataloged and it's not lost. I will get to it, but it's just how it goes down here in the basement. I have to prioritize projects, and sometimes if I'm working on big projects like the Plexus P20 thing or the Mac SE, all those repairs I was doing, that took all my brain power, and I don't really have time to divert myself and then start working on stuff like these and where I couldn't figure it out. So I had to kind of wait till I was done with the Mac stuff before I could check this out. And look, even now I got totally stuck. Anyhow, that's going to be it. Thanks to my supporters. They make it possible to do this full time. You can become a supporter. There's links down below. YouTube memberships are available now as well. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thumbs up, thumbs down, all the usual stuff. And thanks to everyone who sent stuff in on mail call. I really do appreciate it. And that's going to be that. So stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you next time. Bye.